Hello and welcome to BICOM's Haaretz Weekly Podcast. I'm Richard Pater, BICOM's Director in Israel. This week we are looking ahead to this weekend with Bibi Netanyahu marking the longest serving Prime Minister in Israel's history, overtaking David Ben-Gurion, the first and founding Prime Minister, around 13 years. Today we're going to talk to two experts, Israeli commentators. The first will be Tal Shalev, who is the Walla political correspondent. She was also an advisor to the film King Bibi, the documentary on the Prime Minister, which I recommend you seeing if you haven't. And then we're going to have a quick chat with Anshel Pfeffer, who is the author of Bibi, the turbulent life and times of Benjamin Netanyahu, and of course the prolific writer with the Times, the Sunday Times, Haaretz, the Jewish Chronicle. I'm here in Jerusalem, and I'm delighted to be joined on the line by Tal Shalev. Tal, thank you very much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
We're going to talk today about Prime Minister Netanyahu and his legacy. As you obviously well know, this weekend he will finally eclipse the record of David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first Prime Minister, and just over 13 years in total service, he will become the longest serving Prime Minister in Israel's history. Just to recap for our listeners, he served from his first tenure from 96 to 99, and then since then he had what he refers to, or it's been referred to as the 9 barren years, the wasted years, and then he returned in 2009 to the current day, in total winning several elections on that journey. If I can start by asking you, Tal, Netanyahu, as we know him, is a man of words. He puts great emphasis in his speeches and his formal pronouncements as part of a marker of recording history. How do you think? How much does he care about this landmark?
Well, I think he probably is very, very, very excited to reach this landmark. If we go back 20 years, exactly 20 years ago, to the summer of 1999, and you would tell Netanyahu, who has just been kicked out of his first term, you would tell him that he would reach this point and bypass Ben-Gurion, he wouldn't believe it, but B, nobody would probably believe it. So it's not only, I think, a historical landmark, it's also the twist of history in a way, because when Netanyahu lost his first term in 99, he was dubbed basically as the worst prime minister, one of the worst prime ministers in Israel's history. And nobody ever thought he could make a comeback, but here he comes back stronger than ever and only growing stronger and stronger. And as you said, Netanyahu, especially as a son of a historian and someone who basically sees reality in a historical prism, every part of reality is part of a history for him. So I think that this is a historic record. He's definitely honored to break, and we'll put him down in history books for, I don't know, forever, if anyone will ever be able to break this record after him.
Right, for sure. We saw he gave an interview last weekend to Time magazine, and when he was asked about his legacy there, he spoke about kind of Israel as the global technological power, how he's kind of seen through Israeli innovation and technology, not only in the civilian field, but in the military and in intelligence as well. How would you at this point assess his legacy?
Well, I think it's complicated. I think that, to be honest, there are two legacies. There's like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So there's Dr. Netanyahu, who definitely has led Israel into a time of prosperity, security. It's been a very pivotal and very rocky era in the Middle East, and Israel has stayed totally stable throughout this past decade. Safe, yes, and also diplomatically flourishing, especially, I think, overcoming the Palestinian problem in a way. 10 years ago, the international community was warning that Israel was going to be isolated because there won't be any progress with the Palestinians. Here we are 10 years later, and Israel is far from being isolated. I would say it's only opening and expanding its diplomatic horizons. So that's Dr. Netanyahu, and also we might mention, he would like us to mention, economy, high tech, technology, innovation, Israel under Netanyahu has become basically, a high-tech heaven. And Netanyahu definitely sees himself and his policies as giving a significant part of that. But then we have, and this is the honest place, we have the Mr. Netanyahu, the Mr. Hyde, the internal prospects that have happened in the last decade, and the internal processes that the Israeli society is going through, which is very much led and flourished by Netanyahu. Radicalization of the discourse, very hateful rhetoric, a very dividing rhetoric, up until a point where I would say the liberal groups in Israel today feel in a way that they are not, that this is not necessarily their country. And there's the divide between left and right. I think there's always been hatred, but since this is in under Netanyahu's era, we have social media, which makes everything so much louder. So Netanyahu basically is responsible for much of the hateful rhetoric, or has been leading much of the hateful rhetoric towards Arabs and towards leftists, which has become a curse in Israel. And to sum up, and just to add something else, that Netanyahu will definitely be going down, and this is part of his legacy, is that he is a master of social media, and he's a master of manipulating the media, and a master of controlling the agenda in any modern way there is around. And he will definitely be going down in history as, I would say, an innovator in the political scene in Israel in that realm.
Could you just expand on that? What aspects do you think he's been so innovative in the social media?
So Netanyahu discovered Facebook in the previous election, in the 2015 elections, but throughout the past 4 years, he has really created a team of young whiz kids who know exactly how to create viral hits. And he, it varies. He has different variations, but if sometimes he gives his own news editions, news bulletins, in which he, broadcasts the alternative positive news, which the mainstream media doesn't broadcast. He uses social media to attack mainstream media and to discredit negative reports about him. And he knows how, if there's a latest trick in the book, then Netanyahu has already using it. If it's a personal Facebook chat or Instagram stories, Netanyahu is at the forefront of the digital era. In a way, he wouldn't like this comparison, but I think in a way that President Obama was in the United States in 2008 and to 2012, Netanyahu is definitely the torch bearer. He is the number one on every social media aspect.
Fascinating, thank you. If we just look ahead to the September election looming, and of course there are still so many uncertainties. We're still 2.5 weeks or so away from the final list coming through and seeing exactly how will there be the mergers on the left or the right. But nevertheless, in terms of Netanyahu, how do you assess his future political prospects?
It's too early to call. But if we judge by the current polls, because that's what we have to judge, and the latest polls in Israel have all been quite stable and show quite a similar situation, and which shows that Netanyahu will be in a problem after the next election. He will be in the same problem that he had after the previous elections, because Avigdor Lieberman, the leader of Israel Beitenu, is not growing smaller, he's only growing bigger. And Lieberman is the one who prevented Netanyahu from forming a government just 2 months ago. and he is out to prevent Netanyahu from forming his dream government, meaning his dream government is a right-wing government comprised of Netanyahu's own Likud party and the right-wing parties and the ultra-Orthodox party. And Lieberman is now in a very powerful situation, and Lieberman is insisting that he will only agree to a national unity government. A national unity government might mean that Netanyahu will have to resign, or at least agree to resign, when he's indicted. Then we have the question, when will he be indicted? That's a big question with a lot of ifs. So far, Netanyahu has been able to manipulate with the legal clock and many legal tricks, and so it's hard to say when exactly he is going to be indicted, but definitely it seems that Netanyahu could be in trouble after the next elections if nothing dramatic happens. That being said, and this I think connects to Netanyahu's legacy, I think that the most important thing that happened to Netanyahu, which will make him go down in history, probably is one of the I would say, as a successful prime minister and also as a lucky prime minister, is what happened in 2016 in the United States. The fact that President Trump was elected to office, and everything that has to do with President Trump has basically given Netanyahu a real diplomatic legacy, both the decision to move the embassy to Jerusalem and the recognition of the Israeli sovereignty in the Golan Heights, and the Iran deal has placed Netanyahu as a very influential player, not only in Israel, but on the world scene, because it is clear that the American president follows at least some of Netanyahu's advice, and everyone knows the very close relationship, and everyone knows the shared political base. Everyone knows about those connections, but I'm mentioning that just to say that being a prime minister, and we still have about 2 months and 2 days till the elections, Netanyahu has many ways to control the agenda. And by controlling the agenda, I mean that he could have another diplomatic achievement, another diplomatic gift from President Trump until the elections, and we could wake up the day after and see that Bibi really is and still a king, or we could wake up the day after and see that he's in real trouble. But just the fact that Lieberman is now not in his pocket has kind of made everything under Netanyahu's basis start crumbling.
Very interesting. One last question. I mean, apart from Lieberman, who is obviously his old friend, ally turned adversary, similarly, Ehud Barak, his former commander, who then went on to serve as his defense minister, is also now back in the political game. How concerned do you think Netanyahu is about his entry, and how do you assess his prospects?
Oh, I don't think Netanyahu is concerned about his entry at all. I think that Netanyahu is very happy about his entry. Ehud Barak, does not change the blocks in any way that harms Netanyahu. On the contrary, Ehud Barak, if at all, takes votes from the blue and white party, which in order to form a government needs to be bigger than the Likud. So Barak is splitting the left-wing vote, the center-left vote. Netanyahu has a saying, I don't care how the left divide their votes, but he does care. He does want blue and white to be smaller than the Likud. So Barak is good for Netanyahu. He's also amusing for Netanyahu and very useful for Netanyahu, because Barak, as opposed to Benny Gantz, who is, very polite and I would say somewhat milky in the way he attacks Netanyahu, Barak is a much more despised personality in the Israeli political scene, especially amongst Netanyahu's base. He encourages, or he creates such antagonism amongst Netanyahu's own voters and supporters that it kind of brings them back. He's the enemy that they can hate, and he's an enemy that helps Netanyahu, kind of rally support behind him, as opposed to Benny Gantz, who's a nice guy, and it's much more difficult to hate him. And that's why we're actually seeing Netanyahu attack Ehud Barak all the time. And what we're seeing basically in the past 2 weeks is that Netanyahu and Barak are just exchanging barbs on a daily basis. And Benny Gantz isn't even part of this play, because Netanyahu wants Barak to be larger so that he can continue to use them as the enemy to consolidate his base.
Fascinating. Tal, thank you very much indeed for your time. It was great talking to you.
You're welcome.
And I'm delighted to be joined now by Anshel Pfeffer, who is the correspondent for a number of publications here, including the Times, the Sunday Times, the Economist, the Jewish Chronicle, and Haaretz. He is also the author of the book Bibi, The Turbulent Life and Times of Benjamin Netanyahu. Anshel, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Richard.
If I can ask you first, if Bibi left office tomorrow, what would be his legacy?
That's a very good question, because legacy is something you leave to your successors, and I'm not quite sure Netanyahu is leaving anything to his successors which is that dramatically different from what he received 10 years ago. I mean, yes, Israel has had in this period 10 years of economic growth and relative security, certainly relative to this region and to Israel's past. But nothing has dramatically changed. None of the challenges facing Israel have, both on the regional and the neighborhood and within Israeli society, none of those have been solved. And Netanyahu hasn't really made much of an effort to solve any of these issues.
Okay, how would you describe him in terms of, would you say he's a master technician or a tactician or a strategist? Does he know how to make big decisions?
I think that, you asked three questions, and I think, first of all, he is both a tactician, he's very good at electoral political campaigns, all the tactics of both winning elections and holding on to power, remaining in office. He's a strategist in the way that he sees the world and the region, and he plays those power plays between world leaders. He does that extremely well. At the same time, he does not make big decisions. He's very much a status quo prime minister. He speaks a big game, but at the end of the day, he hasn't made decisions which have dramatically changed Israel's situation. He's responded quite well to changing circumstances, but that's being reactive.
And in terms of trying to place him politically, would you say he's a shy centrist or a kind of a true bona fide right winger?
Well, I think that he is a true bona fide right winger in the sense that, certainly in the Israeli sense of not being willing to make any changes to the status quo with the Palestinians. And at the end of the day, we judge things in Israel on that. We judge the right-left divide in Israel mainly on that issue. Coming after a series of prime ministers, Yitzhak Rabin, Shimon Peres, Ariel Sharon, Ehud Barak, Ehud Olmert, who have all tried in various ways to change the paradigm with the Palestinians, whether by compromising and making peace with them, or in Sharon's case, unilaterally retreating from Gaza. These have all been these five prime ministers try to change the situation. Netanyahu ideologically believes in not changing the situation and in waiting for the Palestinians and for the Arab world to give up on Israel making any kind of concession. I think in that sense he is a right winger. He's not an ideological religious right winger in the sense that he doesn't believe that Israel needs to annex the entire land of Israel and the West Bank and so on immediately. He's in no rush to do
that. Okay. And looking ahead to the elections, I mean, how do you think his prospects stand as we look at it today? Is his career about to end?
Well, right now we're looking at another stalemate in the same way that we had one in April, where Avigdor Lieberman held the balance of power, and in April, Avigdor Lieberman just barely held the balance of power. Without him, Netanyahu had 60 seats, so he was on the verge of having a majority. All the polls made since the Knesset was dissolved by now a month and a half ago have shown that Lieberman is just increasing his share of seats, making it even more impossible for Netanyahu to form a government. And Lieberman is not saying, he's not ruling out officially on record for joining another Netanyahu coalition. He's just saying, we're going to have our demands mainly vis-a-vis the ultra-Orthodox parties and their demands, which will probably make it impossible to form a coalition. But also we know that in private, Lieberman is saying that Netanyahu's over, and he's going to make sure that he doesn't form another coalition. So it's hard to see how, without those crucial votes of Israel Beitenu, Lieberman's party, and with the main centrist party, Blue and White, vetoing a government under Netanyahu as long as he's still facing the criminal indictments, it's hard to see how Netanyahu can form a coalition. At the same time, it's also hard to see an alternative coalition. So anyone who's going to try and predict how how the next election, and more crucially, how the aftermath of the next election, when the newly elected parties are going to have to try and work together to form a coalition. Anyone who's going to predict how that works out is a very brave punter.
Just in terms of kind of what we can expect if in the campaign or afterwards, we've been hearing other right-wing politicians talk about annexation. Netanyahu himself has never used the word and never kind of expressed any kind of particular appetite for that. But
that's not entirely true. He did in the final days of the last election campaign. He did speak about it, and it was sort of a carrot he was dangling in front of the right wing on the eve of election. Also part of his tactic to try and draw some of the voters away from other right wing parties until he could. But you're right, he never really showed appetite for annexation. Besides during that period.
Right. Well, I was going to ask kind of to compare that and kind of the pressure he may have on the right wing and even with his own party with as you described before, as being very much a man of the status quo. Kind of what gives between those two positions.
Well, I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing the different shades of the right wing in Israel, and Netanyahu is being forced to try to have to choose between them, because Netanyahu's genius as a politician, we said he's a tactician of elections and of coalition building, was to sort of smooth over the difference within the right wing and between the right wing and the religious parties, so he would always have a majority in the Knesset. What's happening now, and this is what Lieberman has sort of engineered, is that we're seeing more and more right wingers feeling dissatisfied with Netanyahu because they don't quite know what he stands for. Does he stand for the right wing, but a more liberal-minded, less religious, coercive right wing? Is he still an ally of the Orthodox parties? Is he in favor of annexation, which not all the Israeli right wing is in favor of? It's more the more radical element and the settler camp which is in favor of annexation. I think the much broader right wing, which is Likud, are less gung ho about that, and they're okay with Netanyahu's status quo until now. But now he's being torn in all these directions because suddenly the coalition really isn't sticking together, and that is beginning to spell political doom for Netanyahu.
Fascinating. Well, we will no doubt watch it carefully and read your analysis in print as well. Thank you very much.
But the important thing is that he's broken Ben-Gurion's record. That's who would have believed it?
Right. Well, I suppose the last week, how important do you think that is to him?
Well, never forget, Netanyahu is the son of an historian, and he sees things sometimes in perspectives of millennia. So certainly a historical record like that means a lot to him. But at the same time, he's Ben-Gurion won 5 consecutive elections, and Netanyahu has failed to win a 5th election. It was he claims to have won it, and only to have the victory snatched away by Lieberman. But no, it was a stalemate. Israel, you only win an election once you're sworn in. So Netanyahu now only has 4 victories. He's the prime minister of an interim government, not of an actual serving government. So I think that while he will probably be breaking Ben-Gurion's record this weekend, he also feels that it's a hollow victory.
Well, with more to come. Thank you very much.